Not a good day for Wallace Bradshaw. That former district attorney in North Carolina found guilty in 5 of those 7 public corruption charges. You just heard his sentencing right there. I'm here alongside Linda Kenney Baden, a criminal defense attorney. We love having her on. Okay. License revoked, 250 hours of community service, and he's serving hard time.
And he's going to serve hard time. He's at least serving, was 4 to 14 months. So I don't know how much time they will allow for the fact that he's on good behavior when he goes in there. I mean, he may end up serving just a month, by the way. But he's going to be serving something. That's the interesting part. Everybody else scot-free. Bradshaw tried the case with his own attorney, himself, and he's going to jail.
Never a smart move when you act as your own attorney. This might be a hard lesson this man listened here. The sad thing I have to say about this, too, is, you know, he made some really, really poor decisions. Apparently, he had an alcohol problem. We found out about that. He said he had gone to alcohol rehab. Now, prison's one thing. Now his license he's been disbarred. He can't do what he's done his entire life to make a living. Yes, that must almost be worse than the prison time.
That's right. And he's as he, you know, everyone says when everyone gets sentenced to a crime, he's ruined his family, he's ruined his reputation. He's sentenced to. They're going to give precautions about him because he's in danger of being attacked. He's a law enforcement officer that's going to be in the county jail. He's not going to the state prison. He's going to stay in the county jail. They'll try to protect him. But, you know, you look at him, he's going to be a broken man. This is a really bad thing, but it's a good lesson. Prosecutors are not above the law. They're not above the law.
But if you're a taxpayer in North Carolina and you saw what just unfolded and you saw this other prosecutor and his wife get away with doing this scheme, that would rub me the wrong way. Well, I got to say.
That's right. Either, you know, there should be parity. There should be equity. I mean, yes, can you get something for being a state's witness? Do you get a reward? Sure. But he's scot-free, and they're the ones who really, you know, his wife didn't work. At least Bradshaw's wife worked and did something. But Cindy Blitzer did not work at all. She was going to nursing school. It's outrageous.
And she knew what she was doing was wrong. It was pretty clear when she was on the stand. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she knew it was wrong. Okay, let's turn right now to another trial that we're going to be covering when opening statements begin in Kentucky. This is a tragic case where a driver in a car crash killed a family of 5. He's going to trial. Let's take a listen. So, Drew Peterson, he wants his conviction overturned. He's appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court. You just heard that, Linda. Does he have any kind of shot in getting this?
Well, let me first disclose that my husband testified against him for the government and did the second autopsy on Ms. Savio. But does he have a shot? I can't even find it, okay? You know, the Supreme Court takes important cases. This is not an important case. And you know what's interesting about this case? Stacy, the 4th wife that started all this, her disappearance, has never been found.
Her body's never been found. So he, even though he was suspected in her death, he was never charged in Stacy's death.
That's right.
That's what caused them to look back at Savio's death.
That's right. That's exactly what happened. And then he was convicted in Savio. And poor Stacy's family obviously is suffering because, you know, they want closure. They want closure. Sue Savio and the relatives of Kathleen Savio have gotten some closure. But still, every time this comes up in the media, every time he does some of the appeals, the family's wounds get reopened.
Yeah, and he's not stopping. I think he appealed a couple of times to the Illinois Supreme Court. Right. Now he's taking this to the U.S. Supreme Court. Obviously, when the U.S. Supreme Court takes up a case, it's usually because there's some kind of constitutional issue or real injustice. Jurors in this case convicted him. Unless they can find some kind of appealable issue, I agree with you. This is going nowhere.
Right.
Okay, let's turn briefly now back to another case that we have been covering, and that is the case that we're going to go back live in just as soon as testimony begins, and that is the case out of Kentucky. That Marine Corporal, Jonathan Price, who was murdered by, according to prosecutors, these 2 defendants, Dewan Malazam and Consinio, Canada. They're facing trial for his murder. Take a listen so we can get updated on this case.
The Kentucky trial of the shooting death of a Marine is underway. 26-year-old Consinio, Canada, and 34-year-old Dewan Malazam are charged with murder and assault for an incident outside a bar in 2014. The two men allegedly approached Corporal Jonathan Price and his wife Megan when one of them tried to snatch her purse. When Jonathan got involved, a fight started, and the corporal was fatally shot in the back. Megan suffered a non-fatal bullet wound to her leg. Both men are also charged for a robbery 6 days prior to the Price shooting. Law enforcement connected them to both crimes by identifying the .45 caliber handgun used in the robbery and the shooting. For Law and Crime, I'm Rachel Stockman.
So this is just one of these cases, Linda, where it's just so tragic. You have a case of this beautiful young couple really in the wrong place at the wrong time.
And this is the kind of crime that people hate listening to because it makes everybody feel unsafe. You feel like you can't go anywhere, and something like this could happen to you. And you have this young couple. It's amazing she wasn't killed. It's amazing more people weren't. It's just terrible. Terrible.
And this was basically this man, Jonathan Price, the victim, was trying to save his wife.
That's right.
He was trying to interfere, stop this robbery in progress, and this happened. It's one of these situations you wonder, well, what if he had just let them go? Who knows?
But who knows?
We weren't there that day. We don't know. Maybe he was they were trying to threaten her or whatnot. What do you think, though? Because we have these two defendants, Dewan Malazam and Quincinio Canada. They're being tried for murder. However, this isn't a slam dunk in my mind for the prosecution.
Right. If this case is solved, and these people are guilty, I mean, they're on trial right now, they're denying it, it's good old-fashioned police work that will solve it. Now, what connects them, though, is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, is something called ballistics. Ballistics identifies weapons, but it's based on the value of the ballistics examiner, the person who can match the cartridges and all. And if you recall, when we tried Aaron Hernandez's case,
yes,
that was one of the issues, did the cartridges really match the guns? So it's an area that is being challenged right now by defense attorneys. I don't know how good the matches are, but if they're good, then it's a pretty good case. But then, who did the shooting? Who was the shooter?
That's right. Even if they are able to match the bullet to the gun,
right,
you still have the issue of the chain of custody for the gun.
That's right.
Well, I say chain of custody not in the police authority sense, but for the defendants, because the gun is apparently sold in the interim, so there's not a direct link to the defendants and the gun.
Right, unless there's an identification, but identifications, it can be argued that they're suspect because they're afterwards, and they're also cross-racial identifications. And the science has shown, and courts have adopted the stance that when you have a cross-racial identification, it is not as good as a regular identification. For instance, if you're identifying me, all right?
And we also had a situation where the person who identified one of the suspects said some questionable things on the stand, and then the defense attorney was able to bring up these racist Facebook posts that he had put on his Facebook. That's not good.
Not good.
Especially when you, again, you know, you don't have clear surveillance video. Yes, you have some ballistics. Yes, you have the gun, but a lot of the case is really, they're going to have to paint a really clear picture of why these guys did it. And one of the pieces of evidence they're using is surveillance video from 13 minutes prior to the shooting, where the two defendants were identified at being at a store. I think it was a liquor store, but that was very, very close to where the shooting happened. Now, that's pretty damning information.
Right. They can put them in the vicinity, and they can put them, obviously, near the guns, but they don't have fingerprints on the guns, right? And they do have this question of identification. Look, the jury is going to take it all. They're going to say, do I think beyond a reasonable doubt it's been proved? You know, that reasonable doubt standard sometimes does get moved a little bit, you know, because if they look guilty or there's some other evidence. But again, indeed, it doesn't rely on the DNA here. Everyone's used to DNA.
We love DNA.
We love DNA. It has to be old-fashioned police work. It has to be knocking on doors. It has to be going through dumpsters. It has to be talking to people that will solve or has solved this case.
And Linda, I always like going back to this. Jurors, I've heard it being called the CSI effect, where years and years ago they were perfectly happy convicting some of these defendants based on what we call good old-fashioned police work, but with the, you know, with all these crime shows where there's exact DNA evidence linking all of the suspects together, has that actually had a sizable effect on jurors?
Yes, I've seen prosecutors perform tests they don't need to perform just so they can say to the jurors, look, we did these tests, even though irrelevant. Like, what does DNA have to do with this there? I mean, it may be on the gun, it may be issues for that, but it's an armed robbery, and normally you're not not touching the person as you would in a sexual assault case, for instance, or someone who's close and there's a struggle. So, you know, what they expect and what they get may be two different things.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how this case pans out. Okay, we're continuing to monitor it, and we're expected to go back in session around maybe in the next 20-25 minutes, so we'll bring you live in the courtroom when that happens. In the meantime, I want us to take you back to some testimony from earlier from the defendant, one of the defendant's sister, Dewan Malazam. Now, you should listen closely to this testimony because she talks about a hat that Dewan was wearing and how he really liked wearing hats. And if you'll recall, this came into play earlier this morning when a hat was recovered at his apartment, thrown away in a dumpster. Okay, let's listen to some of that testimony.
Do you know?
Nafisa Malazam, the sister of Dewan Malazam, who's on trial for the murder of that Kentucky Marine and the shooting of his wife. Linda, she didn't look very happy to be there, I gotta tell you.
No, that's the witness. If you're the prosecutor, you hate having to call her because she was not happy, but you have to call her because you want the family member to say, yes, that is my brother, and it's very hard to do, in the car, and he's wearing a hat. But you notice she didn't know the hat. She couldn't identify the hat.
She couldn't identify the hat, and you could just tell by the way she was acting, she was not happy to be there. No. Now, some folks might not know this. If you're a family member and your brother, sister, mother gets in trouble and you're asked to testify, do you have to do it?
Yeah, yes, you have to do it. There's only some exceptions with the husband, wife, and those have been obviously cut down a lot. But yes, you have to do it or else you go to jail. And I was telling you in break a story when I was an assistant prosecutor in Monmouth County, New Jersey, where the first assistant brought us in because it was a case where somebody didn't tell on their child. And if you don't tell on your child, your mother, your sister, whatever, you are going to jail for obstruction. So yes, they have to go to jail.
And I'll tell you what, she probably didn't want to go to jail for her brother. So again, this was important testimony because she identified the car in the area at the time of the shooting from that surveillance video. We're going to continue to monitor that case and take you back live in the courtroom just as soon as we get our feedback. We're going to take a quick break, and after this break, I'm going to tell you about another case that we're covering, very interesting, out of the Georgia area. We'll be right back. Wow, so all of these years later, Linda, these people are finally arrested, and it's not quite clear. I haven't been able to figure out exactly what led them to these five. Two of them facing murder, two of them facing aiding and abetting, covering this up, and a detention officer facing obstruction charges. You know a lot about cold cases. First of all, how hard are they going to prove once this does go to trial later this week? And then also, what do you think led to the arrest? We don't know the details yet, but in cases like this.
They can be very difficult to prove, except that it sounds like to me here that somebody who had known these people that may have been involved in doing something also finally went to the police. And then there was evidence that they were able to deal with the police or send the police to, that pretty much sealed the case that they should charge them. Because remember, they were suspects all this time. The police just needed something. So, I mean, these cases make my blood boil because this is terrible. What a racial motivated crime. And remember, until the second half of the 19th century, it was illegal in many states to, you know, marry, kiss, date a woman or a man who had blood in them who was black. I mean, so this is not that far off, but this is this is an awful
horrible
case.
Case.
Horrible
And
case.
Prosecutors are saying because of the brutal nature of the way that Timothy Goggins was killed leads them to believe that this was a racially motivated crime. That's interesting because I don't know if we're going to have any further evidence, perhaps statements that they may have said after the two were seen together outside of the bar. But does that actually matter in the long run, whether or not this was racially motivated in terms of solving this crime?
It depends on the statute, not in terms of solving it, but it depends on the statute involved. And yes, you know, probably the way he was killed, obviously, you know, definitely was racial. And again, the tipster would have known that certain things were said by everyone or all or some of the people involved.
So likely whoever the tipster is, and I really can't wait to find out when we air this trial, I'm sure it's going to testify to whatever they told police. But again, this is going to be a situation where this crime happened 34 years ago. So you're probably not going to have any DNA evidence.
No.
So it's really going to be, once again, a case of police work.
Yeah, case of police work. And also, at the time with the police work, since they were suspects from the get-go, there probably is some evidence out there, and there probably were some witnesses to other things out there that can corroborate whatever this tipster has brought forward.
Very
and
interesting.
Yes, the case is going to revolve around the cross-examination of the tipster. I'll guarantee that.
And we'll see. So the first of the two that are facing murder charges is going on, he's going on trial in Georgia. This is in Spalding County, Georgia. I used to live in Atlanta area. It's a very rural area, and it's going to become quite a media scene as this trial goes on, expected to start later this week. We'll be streaming it live here on the Law&Crime Network. Now I want to turn to the other trial that we're following in Kentucky, and that is the case of the Marine who was murdered, that Kentucky Marine, Jonathan Price, who was murdered along with his wife. She was injured. Two men on trial, Dewan Malazam, Quincinio, Canada, both facing murder charges, both facing the death penalty. Megan Price, who is the wife of the victim, she took the stand a couple of days ago, and we heard this 911 call she made right after her husband was shot. It's really heartbreaking to listen to. Take a listen.
Let's do the 911.
I think he was much. That was really about to get that shot.
Okay, so,
That guy came up.
okay, ma'am, I can understand you. Where are you?
Austin City, touching that. My husband and I both just got shot. Praise.
What is your name?
Megan Praise.
And did you see who did the Megan?
Two black guys
Did they leave in a car or on foot?
on foot. My husband came up there. I can't move my leg. He shot my leg.
Is there anything you can remember about them?
Two black men.
And that's all? Did you see the
Both
gun?
had guns. One had dreadlocks. White shirt.
Which one? The same
Was the one that shot me. They threw my husband into the truck. Into a truck. Jonathan, I love you. Jonathan, I love you. Jonathan, I love you.
Where was he shot at, ma'am?
I don't know. I can't get to him. I can't get to him. Help me. Help me. Please, I need my husband to
Oh,
survive.
wait, just stay on the phone with me, okay? I'm going to call you when we get there. They're all on the way.
Gosh, and just every time that I hear that 911 tape, I can't help but tear up. I'm here alongside Kenney Baden, listening to that call and her saying, I love you, Jonathan, and then saying, I need you.
I
It's
need
tough
my
to
husband. I love you. I love it. I mean, this is just terrible. Again, jurors want to find somebody guilty that's on trial for this kind of thing because it's so terrible and it's so tragic. And, we're here almost.
I know.
Right? Because it's so terrible. So, the presumption will come with those juries, even though they say they don't presume these two men guilty, the presumption always comes, well, if they're here, they probably did something. And this kind of emotional evidence can be devastating for a defense, just devastating.
Of course, because, this poor woman, here she is. And again, this is just one of these kind of random crimes, which are even so hard to fathom. You can almost say anyone, I could have been that. Anyone could have been that person that happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
Now, what's really kind of interesting about this is, so we listened to some of Megan Price's testimony. She took the stand. And you heard her kind of describe a little bit what happened. She actually, the police had her do a police lineup where they had a bunch of the defendants, and she refused to pick out the defendants. She said on the stand that I didn't want to pick the wrong person.
That's right.
What does that do to the prosecution's case?
Well,
the fact that here she was inches from these people.
Right.
And she doesn't even want to identify them.
Well, actually, it makes the rest of her testimony very valid because she's not going to make a mistake. So that's very, very good. And she does have somebody with dreadlocks, and if you, I don't know which defendant had the dreadlocks at the time.
Yes, because they've changed their appearance.
They've changed their appearance, and that's always an issue when you come to trial because it's so much later. But if the ballistics can connect the two guns, and there's some other evidence that connect them to the crime, it will be good because everything else about what happened will be verified by her, except that she didn't want to pick out somebody because she didn't want to make a mistake.
I know. The fact, I can understand that, though. Can you imagine the pressure? Here I mean, if you pick the wrong person and that person ends up being charged with murder, just the guilt you would feel.
And doesn't that make it even worse that you have this woman who's so wonderful that doesn't want to make a mistake in a crime, doesn't want to accuse somebody, and yet her husband is dead because he tried to help her because her purse was being snatched? It makes it even worse that you look at her as a victim and you say, oh, why couldn't this happen to some nasty person? Not that this should happen to anybody, but why does it have to happen to her?
It's such a heartbreaking case, and you know what? I hope the prosecutors have the right people because there should be justice in this case.
Right.
And this happened on June 21st, 2014, and the family has been waiting 4 years for this to go to trial. And so I hope these are the right guys. However, there's questions.
Right, and I hope they're the right guys too, because or else there's two other guys out there that can kill and rob somebody else. You always want to make sure you have the right person. But there are issues in the case, so we'll have to see how the juries come down on it once all the evidence is in.
Okay, so what helped link prosecutors, or I should say investigators, police, to these two defendants was 6 days prior to the shooting. There was a robbery at the Quality Inn. And investigators, through ballistics, through the gun, were able to link these defendants to that robbery and to the shooting. Shane Hansforth, he was one of the victims of the robbery. He took the stand. Let's listen to his testimony. When I come back, I'm going to sign off for now, and Aaron Keller will be your host.
Welcome back to Law and Crime, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a sidebar going on right now in the Jonathan Price murder case out of the Lexington, Kentucky area. Jonathan Price was a 26-year-old U.S. Marine corporal when he was shot and killed in the parking lot of a bar where he and his wife were out celebrating her birthday. She was also shot and survived. Linda Kenney Baden is here along with me now, and we're finally getting into some of the crux of the state's case that, look, we believe we recovered the gun. It was a gun that was stolen as part of a hotel room heist 6 days before the shooting of Corporal Price. And here we have the ATF agent who was part of the transaction where the authorities purchased the gun. I thought it was interesting that he says, well, we sometimes go back years and trying to trace the gun and whose hands, who had their hands on the gun and how it changed hands and everything. And here, there's what, a 6-day period, and yet no answers.
Right. As a matter of fact, but you heard a little bit about the defense here. Defense said to him, haven't you had situations where the person you bought the gun from turns out to commit the crime that somebody else is looking into? And he said, yeah, in a handful of situations. And then they showed a picture of the person that the police bought the gun from, and in stockiness and build and height, it kind of looked like one of the defendants, I think, Dewan Malazim. And then you also heard them say, well, doesn't the gun manufacturer make this gun in silver? And again, that goes to the fact that the wife of the Marine, Jonathan Price, Megan Price, said that the gun was silver that shot her, and the gun that actually was used in the previous robbery was black, and the gun that was recovered was black. So you kind of heard two aspects of the defense, but they don't mesh.
Yeah, so, okay, so it either is the gun and the color was wrong in the mind of Megan Price, the surviving victim, or it's not the gun, and how does the defense make heads or tails of it? Or is this a case
they argue both,
where you've got two, or is it a case where you've got two defendants and each one is sort of pressing one of these different theories?
Or the theory that they should have argued is that it's just not the gun because the ballistics is a bad science, and maybe they'll do that. I don't know. We did that in Aaron Hernandez, as you know, attacking the whole issue of whether the ballistics matching by a person who doesn't have any set criteria that's been established by any set agency is an actual science. So, but we're not seeing that here. We're seeing more maybe the person who sold the gun was the robber.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of waiting to see if the defense is going to solidify this tactic here, because we did see some of the questioning about the color of the barrel of the gun, and that's been an issue all the way along in this. Megan Price, who wouldn't name or identify her attackers because she isn't sure if it's these two defendants, she was clear that the gun had a silver barrel. The gun that was up on the screen just a couple of minutes ago from this agent who was involved in the purchase of it, that gun had a black barrel, a black handle, a black trigger, you name it, it was a black gun.
Right.
And the person from whom the gun was stolen in the hotel room heist said it's a black gun. Maybe in a couple of places the paint is flaking off of it, but I would call that a black gun.
Right, I would not call that a silver gun.
One little tiny spot of silver metal showing through does not a silver gun make.
Right, and she's very credible because she refused to identify anybody in the lineup. But you and I also know that people under high-stress situations such as robbery can misidentify faces. They can certainly misidentify the color of guns.
Yeah, we're going to continue to analyze this case when we come back here. There's a sidebar happening in court right now in the Marine murder case that we've been covering live here on Law and Crime from Lexington, Kentucky. We're going to wait for that sidebar to grind along, take this quick break, and be back in just a second. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everyone. We are in the midst of a live murder case out of Lexington, Kentucky. This is the Jonathan Price case. He was a U.S. Marine corporal who was shot and killed while celebrating his wife Megan's birthday at a tavern. There's a sidebar going on in court right now, and we're waiting for this to grind along. Linda Kenney Baden is here with me now. Linda, one thing that's been a bit of a mystery for us watching this case is exactly what the sidebars are, because there aren't really clear objections. I'm wondering if this is one of those judges who likes to have the objections done in the sidebar so that the jurors don't hear the wheels turning along.
That's what I think, Aaron, because we have heard, since I've been sitting here this morning, I've heard no objections at all, but we've had a number of sidebars. So the sidebar, the judge must have said if you have an objection, you just ask for a sidebar because it's a capital murder case. So she doesn't want to have any mistakes, anything going to the jury, anyone making grand speeches in front of the jury. And she's obviously it's an issue because they've been at the sidebar for a very long time. I think it may have had something to do with the hearsay testimony. If my ears were correct, the witness on the stand said something about the seller denied being involved with the robbery or denied being involved with the crime. And that, of course, is you cannot, that's true hearsay, that you cannot cross-examine that seller. He's not going to come here and talk about whether he was involved in a robbery or not.
Yeah, so what's the remedy in a case like this?
Yeah, I don't know, actually. Well, that's what they're arguing to fashion the remedy. Obviously, the defense is going to say we want everything stricken. The judge is not going to do that. She may come back with some type of statement that says to ignore that statement. That's irrelevant here, and you're to ignore it. And
of course, the jurors don't. So
no,
if the judge is going to say ignore it, the judge needs to say we don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, but that they could be arguing over that. We don't know if it's true or not. And as a matter of fact, the defense is already asked a question about whether or not the and if I were the defense, I would say about whether or not their heights and their stockiness and their build matched, and I would want more in the remedy, obviously. And so they'd be arguing about it.
I mean, we're all kind of wondering what's up with this guy from whom the authorities bought the weapon.
Right.
And look, he's not going to sit down and waive his Fifth Amendment, so I'm not expecting him to testify in this because it looks like the feds want to charge him in the gun thing.
That's right.
Okay, so he's not going to testify in this case. Why would it be in his benefit to do so?
Right, but evidence just came in that he said, I'm not guilty of this other crime.
Well, what would he do? So if he makes a deal with the federal case, which I'm assuming is what he's facing for this gun charge, okay, and they give him some kind of a light punishment in that, what's he going to do? He's going to sit down in this case and they're going to accuse him of committing the murder.
That's right. That's exactly.
He doesn't want
that's what
he'd rather face the gun rap, I think, in federal court, assuming that's what's going on.
Yeah, that's what's going on. You heard that question, that specific question, and then when his picture went up in front of the jury, and they asked him, well, what was his build and what was his height? So.
Yeah, it looks like this sidebar is wrapping up, so let's cut back to court now and see if we can figure out exactly what they were discussing and if the judge is going to cure the issue we think happened. So, Linda, you seem to have a new theory as to what that sidebar may have been about there.
Well, it's the same theory, but it looks like that the remedy would be the defense attorney allowed to ask additional questions to this witness before he was let go, relating to what the seller said. So we got more hearsay in that may have been beneficial for the defense.
Yeah, okay, so an interesting remedy for it, but look, a lot of times judges don't want to pull that remedy of declaring a mistrial. That's the most drastic remedy. They would prefer to try to keep things on track with some kind of curative instruction, and in here they didn't, the judge didn't even go that direction. It was just, let's try to move along and smooth it over so that the jury doesn't think that we had a bumpy ride there.
That's right. That's exactly what just happened there, and hopefully that those questions cured whatever the defense was claiming about. But you know, this is a capital case. If these two defendants get capital murder, everything will be looked at with a fine-tooth comb because it gets scrutinized very, very deeply and very much so than any other murder case and any other murder conviction.
Yeah, okay, so to remind everyone, we are talking about the murder of U.S. Marine Corporal Jonathan Price, 26 years old, when he was shot and killed outside a bar in the Lexington, Kentucky area. His wife was by his side. She was also shot. The two defendants you're looking at right there, Quincinio Canada and Dewan Malazim, are the two who have been accused by prosecutors of committing this crime. They're sitting, of course, at separate tables with separate attorneys. That, of course, is for fairness. Right. And we're waiting to see who the next witness is going to be here. We just had the ATF expert up there who was basically talking about the purchase of this weapon that we believe, or prosecutors believe, I should say, is the weapon that was used to kill Corporal Price and injure his wife, Megan. And I'm wondering, the evidence production in this case has been very logical. The witnesses have been up on the stand for short durations. The questioning has been quick. This is a fast-paced trial. Yet it's been a logically paced trial, and I'm wondering, okay, now we have the weapon. I'm wondering if the next person on the stand is potentially going to be the forensic person who talks about the ballistics and tries to match the bullet that was fired as a test bullet from that particular gun that was recovered with the bullets that were recovered from the actual murder scene.
Well, if sequence is good, they should. It should be really, really quick, and it should follow it so that the jury has the whole impact. But, you know, I don't know exactly what they want to get to when they're trying the case. Yeah,
it looks like we've got another sidebar here, and these have popped up from time to time in this case. So I say things are moving along relatively quickly. Relatively is always the key word. Your definition of it is open to as much introspection as mine is. So, look, we're going to listen to some of the testimony of Megan Price. She was the surviving victim in this case. She said a lot about the color of the weapon. She said that she thought it had a silver barrel, and she was careful to not make connections that she wasn't certain about. So she wouldn't identify the two defendants, but she did identify the color of the barrel of the gun, and the color of the gun that she saw was silver, had a silver barrel at least, and the gun that was recovered in that sale had a black barrel. So, is it the right gun? Well, we thought we were going to listen to Megan Price. We have a new witness on the stand. That sidebar broke up pretty quickly. So let's go back to court now in Lexington, Kentucky.